This country's not going to be saved from the top because that's where all the rotting. It's too deep. It's going to be saved from the grassroots.
Good morning, everyone. It's July the 8th, and welcome to the Crossroads for today. Good afternoon and evening for those over in the western, or the furthest eastern or furthest western, whichever way around the world you want to go. So with us today is Rob Klinck from Canada. Good morning, Robert.
Morning. Glad to be with you again.
We also have André Meloche from over in Canada as well.
Good morning, Neville. It's a pleasure to be here.
That's good. And JP Berg, John Paul, welcome as well from Canada. So we're outnumbered here today.
You are outnumbered. It's a pleasure to be back, Neville. Thanks for having me.
That's all right. Now I've got to boast a bit here. We've coming in second in the big race. It was announced yesterday that we are now only second to Iceland in this really big race that the governments are taking us to. We have the second highest inflation rate. Now I don't know if it's really something to boast about, just quietly, and I'm saying this tongue in cheek, but I'd like to know what you Canadians are up to. You know, you're slacking off a bit, guys. Not only that, but all jokes aside, the UN is popped up on the radar. Now we all know we've got local taxes, which we don't like to pay, and we've got state government taxes, which we don't like to pay, or province taxes, and then we've got federal or national taxes. It looks like we're now going to have UN taxes as well. If you go across to Joe Nova's site, which is on the link in the side there, she's talking about the UN's plan to levy trade taxes on global trade. And I'm guessing that's some sort of a response to young Mr. Orange Man's saying we're not going to fund the UN like we have been before. So they're looking for other methods. But I'd also suggest that it's probably always been on the cards. Yes. Interesting. So those are my two little snippets at the moment. But any of you guys got anything to boast about with your government's abilities? Robert?
Well, I just always raise the point that the statistics they give for inflation are always inaccurate, because if you had absolutely stable prices, no inflation according to the conventional wisdom, but if input costs are going down because technology is making things easier to produce and you can do it more efficiently, then if you're not getting a reduction in price to reflect that, you are losing all the benefits of that technological improvement. And that is inflation. Inflation is, it's dilution of purchasing power, but it can take many forms. They can put less in a package and sell it for the same price. All kinds of things like that. But this thing about accepting that the normal way of prices in an economy is for them to decline, I think is a huge oversight. And it's a very easy point to make. I've got an anecdote about that. I was on a national TV show. I used to do 3-minute shows for a national party on the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, on Sunday nights after the news, occasionally. And on one of them, I showed up with a graph, and I showed the way prices ought to be gradually descending or descending dramatically in some cases. They do descend quite dramatically in the computer field. And anyway, I had this graph, and I said, going up like this is what they say inflation is, but there's a difference between what prices were yesterday and what they are today. But there's also a difference between what prices ought to be if you took improved production into account. And I said, if you're going to do an analysis of inflation, you should combine those two figures, because otherwise people aren't getting any benefit from the improvement of technology. So Anyway, I put that graph up. There was a very crudely drawn graph. And 2 days later, I got a call from Revenue Canada, our national taxation service. And I tell you, I was earning a minimum wage. They didn't care about me as a taxation problem. They were just giving me the message that I didn't like their criticism of their accountancy. But I think it's a flawless analysis. And it's something that Douglas drew attention to, Douglas, the founder of Social Credit, that prices, as a rule, should be going down if they're reflecting improvements in productive process. So that's my comment on inflation.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. You know, you work at a factory where you've got so many people on a line, they bring in some new technology, and suddenly, you know, you've gone from 10 down to 2. It's like, well, you know, the prices should get cheaper, shouldn't they? They're pumping out, you know, twice as many bottles for 8 people gone, but it never seems to happen. André, your comments?
Well, Robert is right. And if I refer to the doctrine of Douglas, you should not have inflation or deflation. You should have stable price. In a normal society, let's say you don't have immigration, because immigration can create pressure on the system. But let's say you have a good birth rate, replacement rate, 3-4 children, which is the minimum birth rate is 2.2. You have a society that does not grow. Growth is based on capitalism. You don't need growth. You could need innovation, discovery that would help you enhance your level of life. And then, like Robert said, price should decrease because you produce better, you produce more things, or you produce better things that improve your life. At the end, if we do not focus on the copyright, things should cost zero. When you made your money after that, it should become a part of the heritage of the society. And I think Douglas is mentioning the fact that previous discoveries and invention are part of the common heritage. So when you see inflation, it's consequences of bad policies, injecting money, and you create a boom, speculation bubble, and suddenly it explodes, and then you will go into a recession. Those cycles are like this since more than 100 years. You know, since they create the private banking system, the Federal Reserve, or the Bank of Canada, or the Bank of Europe, which is over the Bank of National Banks. But you have this concept that people think that, okay, inflation is good, or inflation is normal. No, it is not. It is not. You should have a stable society with a replacement rate. You have people who are aging and they die, and you have children who are arriving in life, and you have this stability. Stability would bring harmony. So I think those statistics, I rarely pay attention to it, because I think they just disturb the brain of people. They will stuck on this instead of trying to focus. I would say study the doctrine of Douglas instead of watching those statistics.
Thanks, Andre. Yeah, look, I sometimes like to just throw these figures in that I see. I don't believe them necessarily, but you know, it's the whole financial system is thrives on being unknowable, really, to everybody. So if they can create some sort of a incantation with their spells and everything else to try and explain things away, people get bamboozled and don't look into it too much. But like you say, when production improves, things should get better. And if you were to take the let's see, take a small group of settlers going out to the west of America or into Australia and the outback or whatever, and they get there, and you know, the place is formed. They've got to build gardens. They've got to create houses, everything else. It's going to be a hard slog for a short time, but of course, once they get to that point where they've managed to get irrigation and they're growing everything, life should get better, shouldn't it? I mean, that's the metric. If you get everything set up and you've got everything running, they should then, after they've got everything up and going, they should have time to create the schools and take a breather and, do a few things a bit more relaxed. But unfortunately, we seem to be in that situation where we're always out there slaving to try and keep it going. And that's the whole point of endless production or continued immigration. We've got to keep GDP up. John Paul, any comments?
Yeah, I mean, if we were shareholders as citizens in the country, I mean, it would be different. What's happening presently is we're more akin to debt-ridden wage slaves or indentured employees. And instead of nations, we think of our countries as nation states. It's like we're just part of a transnational corporation, and we're indentured to it. So, I mean, we're at their absolute mercy, and they're not doing things to improve the life of regular people. And that's why we're seeing socialism emerge now, once again, as a reaction to this crony capitalism. And saying crony capitalism is polite. But with the inflation thing that you were talking about with Australia, I'm surprised that Canada's not above that. And I think we're coming back for the title, because Carney announced today another $900 million for Ukraine, bringing our total to about $27 billion. Canada's in a recession presently. The economy's been decimated. And it just goes to show you that this is an extractive thing. Like, they're extracting wealth from all of our nations for their globalist agenda, essentially. And I really see it like that. I always feel like Alex Jones when I say globalist agenda. But I mean, this is the time we're living in. It's very evident that that's what's happening now.
Absolutely, mate. Yes, definitely. We all see it, I think. And we're all talking about it in different ways, but yeah, it is. It's a competition to see who can give away the most, and that's basically what free trade's been all about, isn't it? Or export your way out of recession. And of course, they've linked us into that. We've got to export as much as we can and import as much as we can. It's become the perfect tool then to whack a tax on, like the UN is proposing to do for taxing wealth transfer ostensibly on the transfer and the use of fossil fuels to do that transfer. So they've created the system. They've forced us into that situation by forcing us to look for money overseas. And now they're going to sit back and say, well, hey, now that you're not doing the right thing, we're going to tax you to stop it. Well, make up your mind, guys. But, we were sort of talking about that before, the rise of socialism. When you brought it up before the show started, one of the things that I did note, and I think Robert, you mentioned that the young people, the boomer generation, is being blamed for a lot of things. There's a lot of divide and conquer amongst the haves and the have-nots, I think I would put it as, and I'm on the cusp of that boomer generation. Not that it means anything to me, because I'm hardly a boomer. Whatever that means, I guess. But by dividing us into these groups and saying that someone's got wealth and someone hasn't, or even advertising that the likes of poor old Mr. Elon there, who's only just made his first trillion and looking for his second, the problem is the fact that we're not sharing it enough. So, of course, that's perfect socialism, isn't it? So, yeah, I'll head over to you, Bob, and you can make a comment about that if you like. I look like I've got some sort of an error in my connection. So off you go.
Well, it's that I've noticed this stereotyping of people. And all these sort of conservative, alternative websites talk about boomers. And when they use that term, I guess it's supposed to conjure up some sort of a parody of an individual, but it doesn't really mean anything. And it certainly is unfair to individuals who don't fit into the stereotype. It doesn't, you shouldn't be dismissing individualism in that way, because all kinds of people have all kinds of different beliefs and all kinds of different principles. And to say if you fit in this time slot of boomers, then you are a certain way seems to me to be a real mind trap. And we should not be using those terms. And as far as I'm concerned, if any website is using those things, Gen X's and boomers, there are a number of these categories, I know, but it's just not respectful of the characteristics of individuals. And I think anybody who uses those terms, you should not listen to. As far as I'm concerned, they're either not very bright or they're mischievous, because we should be looking at people's individual beliefs and characteristics and not trying to fit them into some general category that nobody even has defined or understands. But it puts a line of division in society, and that is what is being promoted at all times. It's the old divide and conquer, the young against the old and the men against the women. And they want these divisions of people who, if somebody is defined as not being in their group, then they're not worthy of consideration. And this goes on systematically. It's an old communist trick. It goes back to Marx. Marx was doing this all the time. He used to call the workers pig dogs. The German workers were pig dogs. There's a category for you, a stereotype. But anyway, they use this as a means of psychological control, because once you have the idea that there is some group of people in society who is outside the bounds of being worthy of any kind of consideration, then you have damaged society in such a way that I don't know how it can recover. If we have a Christian society, which I think we used to aspire to, we are looking at all individuals and we're seeing them on a continuum of development. And we're hoping that they will evolve in a way that brings them closer to sort of Christian principles. But we don't dismiss them because at a certain point in time, they're not fulfilling our desires of what they should be. We treat individuals as individuals and we respect them. I mean, if they're violating the law or hurting people, it may be they have to be confined or something. But as a general rule, we should be allowing people to live their lives, find their path, and hopefully acquire wisdom and grow in their philosophical profundity as they go through life.
Absolutely. I'm reminded there, Robert, of when I go and get firewood or want to start my fire, I always get a heap of small twigs and use those first to get the bigger ones going. But if you grab a whole bundle of small twigs, as the old example goes, and try to break it, if you've got too many, you can't. So you've got to divide them up to break them one by one and feed them into the fire. The interesting point out of that is you sort of said, you were talking about something which I sort of saw as they're grouping people into categories that they can label so that one portion of the population sees them as not playing fair, or they're no longer inside that acceptable boundary of what is fair when you're working, when you're doing stuff. So in the recent case here with our, what would you call it, the housing market problems that we've had, capital gains tax, negative gearing on a second house, government forced us into investment for our future because we've got to have so much superannuation, and if we go into a standard super, they take huge fees out. You can manage your own. We're told all sorts of things. If you're smart, you're going to do this. So a lot of people they've bought a second house as an investment for retirement, or they've bought their downsizing house that they're going to go to once they've retired, and they don't need four big bedrooms or 5 bedrooms to rattle around in. But of course now we're being told that we're the ones that are at problem because we've got all this money invested. They've forced us into it, and now they're happy to colour us as the evil people because we're the ones that are stopping the next generation from having this wealth. And I think, yeah, that manipulation has always been a part of the socialist government regime. Yeah, André.
Well, Robert was mentioning, this category, either Gen X, Boomer, Millennial. Uh, Michael Jones, who's an American philosopher, always referred to the categories of the mind. We have categories of the mind, and we have categories of reality. For example, black and white. My skin is not white; it's cream. I have a certain phenotype, and I have people who resemble me because morphology speaking. But outside of that, Robert is right. We're all human beings. So the fact that you're using a category like boomer, it's to first of all to antagonize the other person and to reject the responsibility on this person. You can look at people that are my age or older, and they were a hard worker. You were mentioning Neville, settlers who go and develop a territory. There's nothing. You suffer because there's nothing. You create school, you create roads, institution, and you have to build and you have to work. And you say the next generation will have a better life. That's the concept of progress. But today, I think we arrive at a stage in the Western civilization where boundaries have been pushed very far, and for the wrong reason. People they are saying, well, the pie is not big enough. Now we have to deprive some people who work hard all their life, and of course they will accuse older generation. Oh, you were there before us. Categories of the mind are a way to manipulate people. If you fall into this trap, you will fall into an echo chamber or a ghetto. And I think John Paul always referred to the left and the right. Maybe he will talk about it, but the idea is try to not to fall into this trap. And I will just say one more thing. Civism, meaning respecting each other. My father was a watchman in a high school, and in French, he was saying "Monsieur" and "Mademoiselle" to teenagers who were 12 years old, and they were so surprised. And he was, using a very respectful language. And when he died, there was about 300 teenagers who came to the funeral, and they were and I was telling myself, wow, I'm surprised. My father was not an educated man, but he knew what was civism and respect of individual, and he was respecting young teenager, and it should go both ways. It's not because you're 20 years old that I will respect them, and they will respect us. I think we lost a lot of civism. Maybe we have to restore it, and we have to give the example first.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the whole point of the civil rights movement, whether was the quality of character, not the color of the skin. And I know several quotes have been made about that, but or any other physical feature, really. I mean, if you are a citizen, like you say, or if you're someone who is within that society, then everybody should be treated exactly the same. It doesn't mean that they get preference because of a feature or a color, but they're taken on their character and their knowledge. It's sort of a no-brainer, really, if you think about it. Certainly, if you want something done the way you want something done, you have that right. But I think people have forgotten that. They're too busy. Yeah, like you say, we've been divided far too much, and we're too busy looking at other people as the enemy. When it boils down to it, if you sit down and chat to everybody around a fire, I go camping quite a bit. It doesn't matter where their backgrounds are from, quite diverse. Once you sit down and start talking, you've got all the same aims. You've got all the same desires and same intentions where you want life to go. You don't want to hurt anybody else. You're not intending to, get a leg up and get further up by standing on people. 90% of the population, probably 99% of the population would agree with that. Yeah. So John Paul.
Yeah, I mean, we always have more in common than we do otherwise. So right now they're really fomenting division, and what happens is this categorizes people. So then when you categorize people, you're able to perceive individuals as members of an outgroup. And once you do that, you've kind of othered them. And then this outgroup bias allows you to further dehumanize them. And it can even get so bad as you could rationalize treating them worse. You could rationalize atrocities. That's how this has happened at different times in our history. You don't look when you're doing something to someone, you don't look at them as your equal. You look at them, well, they're in this outgroup. So this outgroup bias is powerful, and it's a psychological mechanism, and they utilize this to control us. But just to take it back to the first topic, we talk about how things should be getting better relative to technological advancement. But I mean, carbon taxation is the perfect grift to kind of prevent that from happening, because what they want us to do is incrementally or gradually acclimate to a lesser quality of life. And why? Well, because the environment. We're going to burn the planet up. So that's their narrative. And it's very pernicious, but it's really brilliant on their behalf, because there's a lot of people from my generation. Now I'm 42. I'll turn 43 this summer. But I have a lot of friends that they didn't procreate. They have no families. They didn't have babies, solely based on this apocalyptic narrative. So, I mean, this is where we are. So people aren't just, a lot of people are absolutely going along with this, and they want to gradually decline their quality of life because it gives them something to believe in, something bigger than themselves. So to say we're confused would be a dramatic understatement presently. We're lost.
Yeah, look, I see that too. A lot of my friends, much the same. You know, one child or two children at the most, or none at all. And they look around and they think, well, yes, climate change is real because we've got all this pollution, or, you know, they're seeing real things. I don't deny that. They're seeing real things, but the trouble is where they're being passed off as climate change, when really it's just the corporations and the globalist agenda driving things to be worse, making a profit. They're out for profit. They're not out about cleaning things up. If you go back to, I think, Ralph Nader in the States, and a few others who were pushing for cleanup. RFK is one of those who was pushing for responsible use of resources and stuff in the early days as a litigant. I think I've got the right person there. And yeah, I've been in a number of factories and I've seen the same thing. They say they're going for net zero waste. You know, there's no waste, and really what they're doing when they're sorting all their bits and pieces out is just recategorizing it. They're turning it into something that it's not, and you're still seeing that pollution. So all the stuff that is supposedly not going to landfill is being sent to a giant factory that is burning it to make bricks. So, you know, it goes into the incinerators and gets burnt. And hey, but of course that's not polluting anything, is it? That's not putting toxins into the air or all the rest. And they've got all sorts of ways of justifying it. But yeah, you're right. It's been a generational thing. I started out in the early 80s with the Nuclear Disarmament Party. I got involved in that. And I could see that, you know, the world was going to blow up. This is what was being told to us as children at school. You know, it's, hey, they've dropped the bomb. It's the big one. And I guess if you went back, you know, 200 years or 500 years before that, of course, they're going to blow up the world with TNT or with dynamite when it was first invented. But it was a real thing for most of that generation. And there were still a lot of people today who are anti-nuclear because of that. And it's a hard thing to change when you've been indoctrinated into it. But we have to realize that, you know, we've got to look at what the realities actually are. And it's not necessarily the technology that's at fault here. It's the use of that technology. The same goes with data centers. The whole point of those was to make life easier and to be able to do mental calculations quickly, much like a calculator, you know, in reality. But the uses it's being put forth to, of course, is to benefit those who are trying to divide us and to keep us under control. So, yeah, it's a difficult thing to try and tell our fellow compatriots out there who are even in our own age group. A lot of them are very hard. It's very hard for them to see where you're coming from sometimes, but I think we certainly have to try and we have to keep pushing it. And those that are in our circles, we've got to find that one thing that they will listen to. I mean, many people immediately just switch off if you start talking about inflation, like I did this morning. unless you can make a joke of it or something like that. But there are other things closer to home that you have to get them to ask deeper questions about, not just the superficial, is it part of climate change or is it just pollution? And, think to yourself, okay, the problems that we have and you're looking at, are they truly climate change or is it corporate greed? And I think it's pretty easy in a lot of cases to put it back to that scratching for money, that the scarce production that everybody's sort of trying to get hold of, even though we have, that huge abundance. All right, so how do we ensure we get what we want? Last week, Daniel mentioned something about the money vote. Can I get a comment from all of you about what your positive reactions are, or something that you think people could be doing to spend their money perhaps in a way that will help us? Or, what actions do you think we should be looking at? Not necessarily the money vote.
Well, Sir Francis Bacon said, money is like muck, not good unless it be spread. And the suggestion was, unless people have money, it's of no value in society. What you want is individuals to have sufficient money to provide a decent life for themselves. And there's no guarantee of that these days. What we hear from our governments is more about future austerity and tightening our belts and accepting that we're going to be sending our resources to Ukraine rather than using them for ourselves. Well, I wonder if we shouldn't have some kind of a competition for young people and say, write an essay on how you can overcome poverty amidst plenty in an automated robotic age. And I think it would be pretty evident to anybody that there's no limit on the amount of, or the number of robots we can have. And they're virtually our slaves. There are slaves who we're not punishing, and they will work for us 24 hours a day if we want them to. And we can, automate processes and have robots doing production. We see this in the assembly lines now. Fantastic things with, they call them robots, but they're just robotic arms that are welding and assembling and putting everything together. And there's no human involvement at all. Well, what is the limitation on our ability to develop in that way? I don't think there's really any. And yet we're always told that our future is precarious and we should be nervous about what's going to happen and the economy could collapse. They're always talking about an economic collapse. Why? Why would the economy collapse? It will collapse if the people who are controlling money decide it should. And they do that quite callously. They have no empathy for the population, it seems, because they put them through all this stress and fear of deprivation in the future. And there's absolutely no excuse for it. A few years ago, a governor of the Bank of Canada said, our economy is producing at 99% of capacity. And I said, what the heck does that mean? You mean you couldn't increase it by 5%? I think it'd be easier to do. Just go to see any manufacturer and say, can you increase your production by 20%? They'll say, sure, if I have the demand and if I have the means of investing in capital to develop my plant, It's a no-brainer. But because we are under the government of this financial monopoly who do not want people to be comfortable and to live in ease, they want conflict and they want hardship. And so I would say that the thing we need is a recognition of the role that finance plays in keeping people down and in making their lives stressful and unpleasant. And it's not inherent in the nature of things that we should be living this way. We have brains and we could arrange things in a more satisfactory way if we had empathetic individuals in charge of public policy. But unfortunately, we don't. And I think this has become very obvious in recent times, with all these scandals with Jeffrey Epstein, that sort of thing. You wonder what the heck is going on and how long has it been going on? It might be being exposed today, but it might have been the way bureaucracies have been controlled going a long way back. It seems to be quite effective, so I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. Anyway, we've got to correct this because it's taking us down the road to scarcity and austerity and insecurity, and we can get together and use our brains in order to come up with a better approach. And this was quite well described, the better approach by Clifford U. Douglas 100 years ago. And his advice, while it was getting a lot of attention when he first produced it, it rapidly became suppressed. And, they had, anyway, what they do on the internet when they prevent people from getting an audience and all this sort of thing. That's been going on for a long time, too. They didn't want Douglas's ideas to spread in society because it would have created a vision for the population of a different way and a demand for their so-called governments to provide for that. It would have been, I think, I'm not a revolutionary, but it would have had a revolutionary effect. But it's what we need to do in order to save ourselves from the constraints imposed upon us by the financial system. The financial system controls everything. In a money economy, you can't do anything without money. So the people who manufacture money, and that's what banks do, they make it out of thin air, they have control over everything. It may be not immediately because people have accumulations of wealth, but it doesn't take them long to strip everybody of their savings if they want to do that. And you have a situation like they had in the Great Depression in the 1930s, where, people were working for 25 cents a day to digging ditches. And it just absolutely insane because there was no necessity for any of it. And there was actually a very prosperous economy developing, the Roaring 20s. The Roaring 20s turned into the Great Depression. Why was that? It was because of management of the financial system. It was deliberately imposed. And they won't let people get too comfortable economically because then they become independent-minded. And we're supposed to be obedient and slavish. That's the condition they want us to live in.
Yes. Again, Douglas has written quite a few things. I've just put up a link there to a short piece called "The Use of Money," and I think the use of money is one of the ways that we can actually show how we feel about things. If we are truly annoyed or fed up with what's going on, whether it's the two big supermarkets or whatever it may be, there's always another option. So we still have, in most towns, we still have a greengrocer of some sort. We still have farmers markets. We still have the ability to say no to things and not actually buy them. And you're not going to be any worse off in reality, unless, you really have to have that processed, muesli bar or something. The reality is, if we all stopped tomorrow buying the things that were causing the problems, then, they'd soon get the message. And I think that's something that we don't do often enough. We've seen before ways of protesting and how effective they are. if you go out onto the streets, for instance, during COVID, it did very little, even though, we had huge numbers of people out. The policy still went ahead. But if everybody had stopped, just stopped participating or stopped playing the game, then they could have done nothing. And I think we don't make use enough of our ability to say, well, I'm not going to buy that. If you look at the company and decide that they're not what you want, the very classic example there to me is Meta or even Google, where they've continued to push the first thing you get on your page is a AI interaction, and they show you everything because that's what they have set it up as. And as I think a couple of weeks ago, I said something like 13% of their custom now has gone to DuckDuckGo, which does not do that. So by simply choosing not to choose the option that you think is wrong, you're giving them a very clear sign. And other people are out there. It's a matter of you determining where you can make that stand and being consistent. André, further comments?
Money vote. I will take a very simple example: the Bud Light effect. 2 years ago, when they decided to put a transgender man, which was a transgender woman, which was a man, in charge of the promotion of Bud Light, which is a beer for men in the United States. It's a symbol. Bud Light is in the Super Bowl and everything. Their sale drops 90% in 1 week. All the people, the real men in the United States stopped buying Bud Light. They had to sell 90% discount of the beer, and the beer was staying on the tablet. It was quite fascinating. Money talks. This is not very complicated. And you said something very important. If everybody could do it, the problem is that we're all embedded in this system, and if we decide we need to coordinate. You were referring to Meta. Facebook, many years ago, they had what they call the flash mob. One young man, 16 years old, decided to do a party for his birthday. So he invites some friend. So I think there were about 2,000 people who showed to his house. His parents were not very happy about it because it was incredible how you can provoke an event, and it can work if it is used positively, meaning stop buying this or stop doing it, and you can expose the real reason why you should not do it, not just for pissing off a company, but trying to federate or to unite people over an idea. This is usually it works with advertising. It works very well. How can we do this with money? First of all, we need self-control. Can we just stop, for example, using a certain type of product because, for example, it gives cancer or it is very unhealthy for it? Self-discipline. You start there, and after that, you can start maybe to think about how you will spend your money. Like I said, money talks. Buying locally, subsidiarity. I think one of the notions that is part of the doctrine of Douglas is to have a local governance where people can take decision at a local basis. I think it's one of the key. It has to be grassroots.
Yeah, that local side of it, again, we've seen that fairly well negated in recent years here with our amalgamation of councils, and we have councillors still within local council, but they have very little control over the direction that the council takes. They may argue over it, but they're really just figureheads that people can vent to. And the real action happens with the CEOs who they're coming from levels of the WF global leaders, young leaders, etc., and those sorts of programs, whereby they are already entrenched in the bureaucracy and already okay with the direction that the world is taking. So, as you say, self-control, I think there's a huge number of people out there who don't have that interaction with local government or with local business even. They're just content to put up with what they've got and try and shop around for the best alternative because they've had so many alternatives. the notion of going without doesn't seem to be there. The expectation is, we've got so much, and it's potential we can have whatever we want if we just put it, tap the card. So I don't know how you get around that apart from education of your kids. If it's not a bargain, if you don't need it, and all of those sorts of old sayings, they're as true as they ever were. But yeah, I certainly agree. It's got to be self-control, because even though people know in many cases that some things are cancer-causing, whether it's red food dyes or blue food dyes in Smarties, they still buy the Smarties and still eat them, knowing full well that the azo dyes within them are carcinogenic. And oh yes, but it's just for the kids' party, and it's like, well, the kids are the ones you should be looking out for. Seriously, you got to have a serious rethink about what you're feeding your kids, because they are the next generation and you should be nurturing them. But that's my hobby horse. I'm sorry. Coming from the food industry, I've seen so many things put in our food over the years, and you got to wonder why, and then you got to then ask also the question that you've told people this, but they're still doing it. Yeah, John Paul, any ideas?
Well, I mean, we definitely vote with our purchases day to day. I don't have much faith in people kind of augmenting that, because we're just we're slaves to convenience in this market, especially with younger generations. And just look at like Uber Eats, for instance. Here's a service that marks everything up from your local restaurants, and they bring it to you. You're paying like 30% more than what the food's worth. And people willingly line up to give more money out, right? And this is it. And we have such a culture that's based on debt now. Like, you get young people are taking high interest payday loans just to have a few extra dollars, right? Like, there's not a lot of discipline with their purchasing. But with that said, the positive thing I could think of is young people. In general, we have to reach them with this message. We have to reach them with a social credit message. Why? Well, because if we don't, someone's going to reach them with a socialism message. And that's going to just perpetuate the status quo. We'll see the pendulum swing back and forth again. And that's what they want. Socialism is like the ultimate controlled opposition. They've parameterized people to view the entire economic spectrum between capitalism, which isn't very capitalistic, it's more like neo-feudalism, and socialism, which still maintains a monopoly on credit creation. So it's how do you want to be? What flavor of subjugation would you like? And now I think with young people, naturally, they have a capacity for rebellion. They have a capacity for pseudo-rebellion, essentially. But I mean, that could be utilized. This is a worthy cause. This is actually giving them something tangible that they can bring and make the world a better place. You know what I mean? As corny as that sounds nowadays, this system implemented would make the world a better place. This is a worthy cause, not socialism. We've seen that. We know that doesn't work. Let's try something else. And if we could reach the kids, if we could somehow reach the youth, the rest will happen on its own. They will pick this up and run with it. And maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm overly optimistic because I'm still very fresh to this, but I can feel that in my bones. We somehow have to package this and get it to the young people so they can truly grasp it. And once they do, I firmly believe that they will run with it. At least I pray that.
I'd certainly like to see it. I've been an avid reader all my life, and I've really focused on science fiction in the early days. And there were a lot of books out there that promoted all sorts of things. But what I think was the most vivid thing for me was the potential that it promoted, not the fairy, cowboys and Indians in space, not the adventurous, whatever it might be, but more the potential where we could be. Are we going to be served by robots? Do we have the ability to, spend most of our day at leisure and, sit down 1 hour a night and just do what we need to do to keep things running? And at the time, I could think of so many other things I would rather be doing than working. And if I had the opportunity, I could think of all the things that I'd wanted to do. I've always wanted to, make a cedar strip boat. There's so many things that I could, apart from just hobbies and hobbies and the rest, expanding your knowledge about things, a deep dive into why your body functions as it does, so you can get to understand some of the medical anomalies that we're seeing. I don't know. I've always had that thirst for something, and the thirst for knowledge. I don't know where it came from, but I saw a lot of people in my generation with that, and I do believe that there are kids out there today that are exactly the same, but they don't have that same access to the material that we had. And I guess a lot of people, and even looking at some of the stuff that I had back then, it was socialist in nature. The Russian science fiction was definitely, pushing the socialist cause. But, a little bit of reading, you'd see through it anyway. From my point of view, I certainly did. But, that potential, that unrealized potential to clean things up, to make things that last 80, 90 years. We buy a car today and within 5 or 6 years you traded it in, or, and someone else buys it and they have it for another 5 years and it's on the scrap heap. Why? We've got cars out there that are, you can go back to the 20s and they're still running. And being in the vintage engine club, it's sometimes it's just as easy to keep them running as it is to go out and buy a new one. And you've got something that's actually quite fun to drive. But we don't see that as much these days. Everything is being new, convenient, the next new thing, and no appreciation of the older stuff. I think that goes for a lot of different categories within the world, whether it be history even. So, we need to put our thinking caps on and work out how it is we get to the younger generation, because like you say, they're definitely thirsting for something. They can see that their future is pretty bleak. They need to be given a better vision and given the potential, given the ability to see the potential, so that they're actually engaged in going for it. If you just give them a pretty picture and say, this is what we're going to have if you vote for me, it won't work. They've got to be engaged enough to say, well, I can see what could be. There's a glimmer of it out there. How do I get it? And you make them work for it. I mean, if they're not engaged, they won't stay engaged for long. So that's the way I see it. So quick wrap round. Robert, summary for today?
Well, somebody mentioned that we're accepting all sorts of impositions on us because we're told the pie is not big enough. It seems to me, if that's the case, we ought to be expanding the pie, not constricting our aspirations. And, young people are not being given a perspective on how they could be enabled to live without, difficult pressures on them, economic pressures. I mean, the prospects for them today are so limited and miserable. They're going to have to live cheek by jowl in an apartment with 4 other people because it's the only way they can afford to pay the rents. This is crazy. Even living in apartments is crazy. We have space. And the aspiration in the past was that people would have their own homes and their own plot of land that they could do something with. But now they're living up in the sky, and, it's so unnatural. We're lucky in our, Australia, Canada, because we have that space and resources. But they're still putting us in these 20 or 15-minute cities. They're building them like crazy, as far as I can see. And I was just watching a documentary the other day on apartments in Russia, and that they did exactly the same thing there in the communist era. They put up all these, they were very cheap apartment blocks then, the Stalinist version of apartment blocks, but they didn't want, Russia has space too. There's no reason to be piling people on top of each other. But they wanted that. It's a psychological conditioning. It's a way of constricting your aspirations for living your life according to your own tastes and desires. And they do that with everybody. So, I think the idea of what Daniel Brittle calls empayment, not employment, is a good one that we should be perhaps introducing young people to, because we have to, you can't have a money vote unless you got money. And there is not an adequate flow of money to the population these days. And particularly, there is hardship being imposed on young people because their opportunity for employment, which is, the way of getting money normally, although it should be supplemented according to social credit by dividends to ensure that the population can always consume its production without having to export it, get it out of the country, because there's not an adequate domestic demand for it. I mean, a domestic financial demand. There's a real demand, but you can't actuate that unless you've got the money to buy the things. So I say the challenge of eliminating poverty amidst plenty has been issued many times in recent centuries even. And I think that's a worthy challenge for young people to focus on. Can that be done? If they were given that challenge, they might start looking into social credit. They can look into other things too, but I don't think they'll find anything that is as comprehensive and as realistic as what Douglas was writing about in the 1920s and 1930s, even up to the 1950s. But there's a challenge for the young people. And if they, as Jean-Paul said there, they can get very enthusiastic about things and they can be very militant about things. And if we could harness that enthusiasm and militancy, it could really shake things up in our society and lead to some good results. Because young people, although they're encouraged not to think for themselves, once they start doing it, they're very difficult to control, I think. And if you can get them working for a good cause, and surely eliminating poverty in the midst of plenty is a good cause, then I think we could have some great results from that.
Very good. Thank you, Robert. André, thoughts and summary?
I will just go with a small quote. I'm reading Michael's journals from the Pilgrim of St. Michael, and they were referring to the Catholic character formation for children. And one phrase caught my eyes, and it's a message for parents. And it is written, "You're not simply raising a child, you are forming an eternal soul." I find this phrase very interesting because it should bring a balance between a material world where you have to work or you need to fulfill your basic need. Let's follow the doctrine of Douglas, which means you would have a dividend that would permit you to have this immaterial world, spiritual world, where you are contemplating nature, for example. There's a phenomenon described by Romain Rolland. He was a French writer. It is the oceanic feeling. You go near the Grand Canyon and you just lean over it and you feel that you're small. You feel that there's something that is so great that it gives you a sense of humility, modesty. And you need both. You need the material world, fulfill your needs, flourish to be able to touch this supernatural world. I think there's a message there. And maybe our responsibility is to try to inspire people, especially parents, so they can raise their children in this mindset. That could be a good way to attract them to learn more about the doctrine of Douglas.
Mm-hmm. You've definitely got to prepare your kids for the outside world, but you've also got to give them preparation for thinking about the greater things. To me, that's camping does a lot of that. You get out under the stars, and you sit out and you look back and it's just immense. The heavens are immense. There's so many stars, and you realise just how small you are. John Paul, thoughts and summary?
So I think essentially, and I heard Dr. Oliver Haydorn say this, our mutual friend, the only reason there's not tens of millions of social creditors presently is because they don't know about it. So, I mean, the goal obviously is to educate people about it. Now, with the young people, they've lived their whole lives. We're seeing the flaws in our system. They're seeing the degeneracy of our culture, moral relativism, and everything that came along with it. And the biggest act of rebellion now, we're in a very unique moment because the culture has been so degenerate. It's went so counterculture that an act of rebellion is to pull your pants up and dress properly and be respectful and maybe go to church. Like, we're seeing that shift now. So that's what fills me with hope. And I mean, again, just to point to the young people, this is a worthy cause. As Bob was pointing out, like, this is the worthy cause. There hasn't potentially been a cause as good as this. This is bringing morality and justice back to our societies, essentially. As long as we're in this perpetual state of scarcity, we can't elevate morality. We can't elevate God because, as Douglas said, money and the money system occupies the space of religion. And that's clearly by design. Like, Douglas perceived it as a bug in the system, but I think there's a lot of people that utilize this as a feature, and they keep us in this perpetual state of scarcity and competition, so we can't see past it. But I'm very heartened when I think of how much potential there is with this system, and I just feel an obligation, an actual obligation, to explain this to people. Everyone I'm talking to, like, it's I want to explain this to them, because once you see it, you can't look at our problems in the same way anymore. So that's the power of this. This has the logos with it. This does appeal to the logical nature that we all have within us. So, I mean, I'm very hopeful. I'm very optimistic. And again, potentially I'm naive or being overtly optimistic, but I don't think so. I think that we're ready for something like this. And I'm hoping to see it reach a tipping point and people start to talk about it.
Thank you, John Paul. Yes. I'd have to say it's not just the young people. There's a lot of people out there, my age and older even, that are also, they've reached that crossroads. They've reached that point in their life where something has triggered their rebellion. Something has triggered it, whether it's an active rebellion or whether it's just a mental one. They have seen part of the light. And all they need is some phrase or something to turn them around so that they can actually start looking in the right direction. You know, we're over here, but there's also plenty of other people out there offering up all sorts of other visions. I think what Daniel said, like I said before, what you said before, Robert, employment, impayment, not employment. Just 3 words. You know, if you put it up on every post you replied to, people would have to start asking questions. I mean, what do you mean impayment, not employment? And is it enough to tweak them? Are there other 3-word things that, you know, it just suddenly becomes a flash? It's before you and you think, well, what's that mean? It triggers your inquisitiveness. Yeah, you know, there are things that we need to as a group work out. I see the potential. You were talking about a pie before, Robert. Yeah, we have the recipes, we have the ingredients, but we're just being told don't touch the oven. And I think we better start using the oven. So thanks for today, guys. That's been fabulous. Hopefully see you again soon, next week. So absolutely. From Australia and Canada, cheerio.
This country's not going to be saved from the top because that's where all the rotting. It's too deep. It's going to be saved from the grassroots.